Steve, we are good to go.
Great, thank you. And as TJ puts up the agenda for today's meeting, I'd like to welcome everyone to our what is now our June meeting, what is now our May meeting of the School Climate and SEL Collaborative for the State of Connecticut. My name is Steve Hernandez, Executive Director of the Legislature's Nonpartisan Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. Today we have a very special meeting ahead of us, but firstly I'd like to welcome the tri-chairs of this body, Michelle Doucette Cunningham, and also our representative from the State Department of Education, John Frassinelli. Hi, Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. I think you can be forgiven for thinking that it's June, Stephen. It's so nice outside today. So I want to welcome you all to, let's say, our early summer meeting as we get started. It's an exciting time to be thinking about how we can do better on implementing social emotional learning. And I'm so excited for the meeting today because we've got had so much progress happen in the last few months, and I feel like we're really moving ahead. But there's a lot of work to do still in terms of convincing the broader public about the importance of social emotional learning and helping them to understand what it really means and how it can help kids and families. So I'll hand it over to John.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, John.
Hi, Stephen. Good morning. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Great to see you all. Thanks for the opportunity to greet you all this morning. I'll echo Michelle's comments on how we make sure that the public understands what social emotional learning is and what it is not. I think that's going to be a constant uphill battle for this group. So we appreciate all of you being here and carrying that message out so that there can be clarity around what we're trying to do and what schools are trying to do with students. So also just want to echo your comments, Stephen, about the legislative session. Tons of work. If you were not paying attention to the legislative session, I would say 75% of what was being discussed had to do with social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health, both of young people and adults. So we certainly have our work cut out for us ahead, but happy to be here with all of you to do it together.
Thank you for that, John and Michelle. And what's really exciting is that what this collaborative has committed to do over the summer, we all have homework. And not only is the homework to imagine how it is that we continuously improve on this work, but also to have our leaders, our teachers, and our students' backs when it comes to what SEL is, why it's important, and doubling down on our support as a collaborative for the work of social and emotional skills building across the state. Thank you for reminding us of that, John and Michelle. And without further ado, we're now entering the second part of what is our series focusing on restorative practices across the state. We started on the first instance on really learning what restorative practices is and also how it fits into the landscape of social and emotional skills building. And also today, we're going to hear now how it is implemented on the ground by those leaders and those school-based teachers that are really doing the work of providing a restorative environment for young people. So I'd like to welcome our hosts, our co-hosts for today, Dr. Joanne Freiberg and Pat Ciccone. Drs. Joanne Freiberg and Pat Ciccone, welcome to both of you, and please take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. And we're so happy that everybody could join. And it was really hard deciding which districts to invite to share a little bit of what's going on. But I'm going to put in the chat right now the order, because the charge that we were given was to hit every demographic in the state we possibly could hit. So I think we've got virtually every, DIRG. We've got urban, rural, suburban, regional, you name it. And everybody knows that they're going to just say some brief comments. And what we're going to do is ask that people refrain from opening their mics until we're done. We're all mindful that we have to end at 12 and we're going to get through everybody. But please, please, populate the chat with questions, with comments, and everybody will jump in and answer them. And as we speak, we will they will throw in their contact information so that anybody can contact folks after the fact. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my Bridgeport colleagues. So just open your mics and start.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lynn Stevens. I'm the coordinator of family and community engagement here for Bridgeport Public Schools. A new position this year, specifically to oversee the social emotional learning program, including restorative practices and in attendance and engagement initiatives. And I'm joined here today by our RIASAP partner that we work very closely with to implement restorative practices within the district. Specifically, you'll hear from Sharon Sinvilson, who is our Director of School Programs over at RIASAP, and Maury Hernandez, who is our Community Advocate at RIASAP, and Mary Pat Healy as well, who's going to give a brief introduction and also share a little bit about the historical background that has developed in Bridgeport Public Schools around restorative practices.
Good morning, everyone. Mary Pat Healy, Director of External Affairs for RIASAP. Hard to believe, but I've been at this in Bridgeport since the very beginning. Our social and emotional learning journey began in 2013 and 14 school year with implementing the ruler approach in partnership with the Consultation Center and the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. We were fortunate at that time that we had a superintendent that knew the Bridgeport district, but also knew that this social and emotional learning needed to be implemented district-wide. Bridgeport has a very high mobility rate. We could see our students in 1, 2, even 3 schools in one school year. So we knew it really did need to be implemented district-wide. But what we learned very early on was that there was a disconnect with the community. We needed to include our parents and our families in this implementation of social and emotional learning. And so this went from a one school pilot to a district-wide initiative to a community-wide initiative. We were training folks in the ruler approach and restorative practices. And when we incorporated restorative practices into this work, that's when things really gelled. We saw significant reductions in school and out of school suspensions, as well as chronic absenteeism. And so Bridgeport has been committed to this work, and we're going into our 10th year. We've also been committed to social and emotional learning and restorative practices, even with change in leadership. We've had 4 different superintendents who have been committed to this work and this partnership. And in 2018-19, BCAC, the Bridgeport Child Advocacy Coalition, under the RIASAP umbrella, transitioned as the lead agency in this partnership. And we brought on new partners with the 2 community health centers, Southwest Community Health Center and Optimus Health, as well as the Parent Leadership Training Institute. And that still continues today. So our partnership has been very strong with the Bridgeport Public Schools, even with 2 new positions, with Lynn coming on board and Sharon and Maury has been doing all of the training down here as well this year. So it's been a great transition, and I'm going to hand this back over to Lynn with the district. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mary Pat. So that's a very high speed background in restorative practices. And that brings us up to present time. So with the initiation of this school year, the intention really was to come back into full in-person learning with a restorative approach in mind. So to that end, Bridgeport Public Schools eliminated in-school suspensions. We implemented 14 restorative practice facilitators across the district at 11 of our schools. And additionally, we changed our messaging in our handbook to promote a more positive culture. Additionally, we really worked closely, Sharon and I worked closely to really help to develop our restorative practices facilitators. And Sharon's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Sharon Sinvilson, and my title is Director of School Programs with the organization RIASAP. And like Lynn said, we work very closely together. I oversee the SEL community schools in the district, which is Harding, Luis Munoz Marin, Battaglia, Bassick, and we may be getting another school in Dunbar. And basically, we have 5 restorative practice facilitators at those 5 different schools. We also have student support advocates at those schools. And basically, you know, we provide restorative practice interventions, impromptu conferences, circles, restorative conferences, mediations, effective statements, effective questions. And, you know, it really is making an impact on the school because staff are engaging more with students. You know, restorative work is being done because we're getting rid of out of school suspensions and keeping students engaged with school. And, you know, the sense of belonging of every student wanting to be in school is at an all-time high. And I think that we're headed in the right direction with restorative practices in the district.
So what's been really interesting is that as we've developed our restorative practices facilitators, what we've seen is really on a small scale level, what can happen at a school when these facilitators and restorative practices are implemented. We've seen our facilitators go from a very reactive approach to handling situations to a very proactive approach. You know, we gather biweekly to discuss different things that are taking place at school. And what we typically hear from the facilitators is they have students coming up to them in the hallway asking to meet with the facilitators. Instead of having to have a circle because there was some type of incident, they're pushing into the classroom and having circles and modeling circles for students and for teachers as well, so that they can do those circles on their own. So it's been really exciting to see that take place. And the number one ask that restorative practices facilitators have is, how can we expand this? They are just one person in the school and they want to be able to expand on this. So looking forward ahead in the upcoming school year, our goal is to ensure that restorative practices is fully implemented at all of our schools that contain restorative practices facilitators and social and emotional learning ambassadors, which are our student ambassadors that are also trained in restorative practices. So that's looking ahead at the upcoming year. That's in 19 of our schools, which is about half of the district schools. And then ultimately in the following year, we will make it a fully restorative district is our hope. Sharon, Mary Pat, Maury, did you want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
I think that sums it up from.
All right, so just in the interest of time, let's move on to Avon. We're trying to go all over the map. So, Bridget.
Good morning, Bridget Heston Carnamole. I'm the superintendent in Avon. Thank you, Joanne and Pat, for inviting me here today. I guess I would start with, we've been dabbling in restorative practices, and we had been dabbling in restorative practices and focused more on the social emotional learning aspect of our curriculum, and also just programmatically. I heard you speaking about ruler earlier, for example, and we had no explicit or defined way to work social and emotional learning skills and knowledge into our curriculum at the time that I started in Avon. I've been here since 2018. And as you know, there had been more and more conversations about that statewide and nationally. So as I came in, it was an easier time, I guess I would say, to promote the conversation around being explicit in our social emotional learning goals and how we would teach them to students. We started in 2018, in the fall of 2018. I asked for volunteers to form a district-wide committee, K to 12. We had teachers, we had administrators, we had support staff, we had secretaries, nurses, really a cross section. And we needed to do it in a way that was voluntary to start the work, because this was not a part of the budget. There were no stipends for someone leading this sort of work or doing it after school. So I put it out as an all call, this is important to us. This is one of the goals we're working into our strategic plan, and I'd like as many people here to be involved in it as possible. We then moved that out to include parents and students too. But at first we started just with a team from the inside, and it was very large, which means, as you know, sometimes that can be difficult to manage. But I was looking at it more from the have as many people at the table to have a voice as possible angle. So that ended up turning into some subcommittees to do different pieces of work also from that larger committee, because it was over 20 people, I think. We scheduled meetings throughout that first year from 18 to 19 and started subcommittees on researching some best practices related to social emotional learning standards and integration into curriculum versus explicit instruction in them. Another subcommittee of that large committee looked at programs that could be utilized, particularly from pre-K to 5, and where we landed. So fast forward, because I know this is the speed version of this. Where we landed was with the committee meeting once a month over the course of one school year, and in that time having a draft. And thank goodness that it was in that time, because as you know, in the next year we would deal with the shutdown and everything that came along with that. So the timing, we had no idea would work out for us the way that it did. By the end of that first school year, the end of 2018-19 school year, we had a K-12 draft of standards for social emotional learning that came out of that committee, subcommittee, and back to the larger committee to discuss and approve, if you will, from a committee standpoint. We utilized CASEL, we utilized I think it was Las Vegas, Nevada standards. We did some research around the country for where other districts or states had done maybe more than we had done at the time, and blended them together, knowing that it was coming down the pike that Connecticut would get there, but thinking wherever we land as a state most likely can't be that far away from these standards that are recognized nationally through CASEL. So we rolled that out. We tweaked it a bit. We discussed it. I discussed it with the board. It became a part of our strategic plan to determine what that would look like moving forward. And side by side, the subcommittee recommended that we utilize Second Step, at least as a start. And we had looked at Ruler and others, and that was a tough choice. But in the end, that was what the committee recommended. And I think it was in part because honestly, it might be easier to implement as a starting place when there had been no other program in place. So by the time we were in that summer, we had moved some things around in our budget to be able to support the initiative in purchasing the Second Step materials, put together professional learning that we would start at the beginning of the 19-20 school year related to the standards that we had drafted, and also the implementation of Second Step. We moved all of that forward in 19 and 20 at the same time that we were working on other pieces related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and also school climate. We were working with CREC, we were working with CERC, we were working with Derek Hall from Recenter and some of those pieces, and we were working on them parallel, and where obviously they converge because they're a part of a big umbrella related to school climate. So end of 2020, we're where we are. The good news was we were able to utilize some online trainings, as I'm sure many of the rest of you as educators and administrators know. One of the silver linings was being able to, if you could, utilize online training and get more people through professional learning than we sometimes can, especially in the last couple of years with coverage issues from substitutes and so on if you're doing things during the day. So we implemented Second Step fully, kept tuning that, tweaking that, and then we began to utilize the social emotional standards that we had drafted to work them into our curriculum so that they weren't a standalone piece. That is something we're still in the process of as we do the curriculum reviews. Nonetheless, all of our faculty and staff know that they exist and that we have explicit ways of teaching them, particularly in K-8, because we ended up moving the second step up and utilizing it a little bit differently in 7th and 8th grade, because it starts to change a little bit at that point. But in all honesty, the high school is a place where sometimes that's a harder move and harder to implement in a systemic way. So that's still something that we're working on. And I say that too as someone that, you know, was a high school person before I was superintendent. So a lot of recognition of what that looks like, trying to move forward on social emotional standards and school climate work sometimes in general. As we went into the next year, we thought the next step in our process here was to look more at school climate from a systemic piece, not just the social emotional standards, but what are the, let's look at our data, let's look at our routines and practices and how they support students being connected and engaged at school, and our staff being connected, engaged in the work, and a safe learning environment for everyone. And at some point along that continuum, I called Joanne. Side note, I worked for the state of Connecticut I started my career teaching in Waterbury, where I had gone to school. And then when they had a number of layoffs, left, and I was in the tech system for 11 years after that. And as a part of that system, we did quite a bit of work related to school climate over the years, and also restorative practices. And so I had a different background and mindset and frame of reference than many others did on the team. But I also, in some of the turnover, as people retired and so on, an administrative team in particular, and we hired folks from outside districts, we had at least 2 that had very similar training to what I had had. One that had been entirely through restorative practices in another district, for example. So as an administrative team, we got together and said, what is our goal? What's next? How do we start to move this forward and not do it in bits and pieces and silos at the schools like we've been doing? So the entire team, all central office administrators, all building administrators, and I mean all, like our food service director, our director of facilities, our director of security, whether certified or non-certified administrators, started down this path of some basic and school climate training, the trauma-based training that it can set the stage for quite a bit of this work, especially as we were coming out of the pandemic. Again, I think the timing at that point worked to our advantage. I think it could still work to anyone's advantage. But we also had a staff and community, like we all do, that needed some different kinds of supports as we were coming back full in and reopening schools. So Pat and Joanne did work with us to have our entire administrative team at this point has gone through restorative practices together. That's taken us the better part of this school year. Earlier on meant giving up some of the other trainings we might have done together and so on, and finding time and lots of ways, but we have fully implemented that. We have, as administrators, we have taken small groups from each school, again, sub coverage and so on being an issue, and started the training there. We trained our whole entire faculty on trauma, in basically trauma-informed practices, and the basis of the foundation of restorative practice that goes along with that training. So every faculty and staff member got that between January and March. And again, we were able to do that very large scale by doing it online. And now as we're moving forward, the next steps are more people from the schools to go through that training, particularly support services people and some additional teachers. And we do have a sprinkling of people out there that have had similar training in other places. Back to, I think, what I heard about the community and getting the community involved and so on. And of course, if you're working in an LEA, making sure the board stays alongside of you. We have rolled it out. Also, we waited until it took roots a little bit. Sometimes I think that's the best strategy from our standpoint. We talked about it in public. We talked about what we were doing. We talked about our goals, the strategic plan, and related to school climate, social emotional learning, and restorative practices, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the goals are explicit in our strategic plan, but a lot of the ways in which we were starting the train rolling to implement them here, we did with a focus inside instead of communication outside. And at a certain point, you have to move to the point someone else made, making sure that the families, the board, and the students are coming along with you. And that's honestly still where we're in the place of right now. So we have done it with the board. We have support there. We've had small conversations with parents as things have happened, and we've had to employ certain strategies related to, our work around restorative practices, but no large scale communication. So as we move forward, that's the next thing on the agenda for us.
Thanks so much, Bridget. Let's move right on. I'm mindful of time here, and we're going to New Milford with Holly Hollander.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be part of this opportunity, and I've also appreciated the opportunity to hear what my colleagues are doing in other places in the state. A lot of the same experiences, and it helps me to think about our next steps. So I'll just give you a brief sense of where we're at. I'm new to the position. I serve as the assistant superintendent and started this year. So I'm going to take you back just in terms of where I know that we've been. I don't have a lot of historical background in terms of just really last year's work with the district during the pandemic, through the vision of our superintendent, really looking at what the needs are of our community. I'm going to say that word is, and I mean it, the community, not just the school community, but as a whole. And really, and so she, at that point, really used our time to really do the same as my colleagues have said, training, helping everyone to have an understanding of what restorative practices are. And I appreciate the opportunity to really learn about myself and what my impact is on those that I work with through this experience, because we're all human, and this is a really human profession. And so people, whether it's children, tall people, or short people, we're all coming from a place, and certainly the pandemic has created a space of people to experience, for lack of a better word, trauma. So the restorative practices work started with sort of identifying the need, appreciating that, doing the good work of providing the training and the understanding and the language, because that's the key here, is you need to have consistency. And I appreciate the K-12, pre-K-12 coherence of that work that our superintendent did all last year. And so we built that capacity with our faculty, being very inclusive. And then really where we're at now is the journey of implementation. And I don't know about you, but I didn't know really exactly what we were going to welcome back. I knew there was going to be learning loss, and I knew that there was going to be the social emotional need, but I think we've really sort of experienced it in terms of where people are at. And it doesn't matter if you're tall or short, or that you really have to, you've experienced coming back into what it means to work with people in real time. So I guess my place is that we are really working to build that capacity right now. Our journey is that we are creating that language and that sense of community, and that consistency through all of us. A lot of my work, because of the just the nature of it, has been in a lot of the secondary, which I know we've all been experiencing, students coming back and recalibrating their place and space in a social setting of school, and really looking to be more proactive. I know that my colleague in Bridgeport shared that proactive versus reactive. I appreciate that, because that's what we're really building to, is to be proactive in our approach, and to provide those systems of helping students to have relationships. You can't have a restorative environment. And I want to say the restorative approach is not something you do, it's something that you are. And building those strong relationships, because you can't have a circle without having those relationships and trust. So we're building that. And I'm really working to sort of not, for this to be something sustainable over time. So it's not something that I want to see sort of in now and then we go on to the next thing. It's important that we build the community's understanding of what restorative is, and the benefits of it. And it's everything from presenting it to the board, sharing it with our with our community partners, and really building that sense of how we're going to support our students, because I have said in multiple forums, students are with us during the day, and then our students go back to our community as families and children in the community. So I'm not sure, we're sort of at the beginning stage of our work. It's education, but the other piece that's been really critical is the ongoing support. It's not a one and done in terms of the professional learning. It's that in action that has been really a gift for me to be able to work alongside of Pat and Joanne as we problem solve and look at how do we address today, but what does that mean for our work for tomorrow? So we are at the beginning stage, and I appreciate being here with you today to learn all of your stories that got you where you are today, and how we can sort of take those stories and grow from it as a community here in New Milford.
Thank you, Holly. I'm not sure I see anybody here from North Stonington. Am I missing that? So we can park North Stonington for a bit and move on to Stamford, Olympia.
Hello,
It's
good morning,
you.
everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, hi.
Yep.
I'm Olympia Della Flora, and I am one of the associate superintendents in Stamford. And I'm gonna echo a lot of the things that have already been said, or I'm not going to echo those. I just want to share just some key points about Stamford and kind of like where our journey is. And I also would like to just give some tips for those of you that may be thinking about going down this journey. We in Stamford I would definitely say that we have had challenges with helping people understand, just as people have said on this call, what restorative practices really is. And so in my role as an associate superintendent, being a former principal, I know that my role is really how do I support the policy and the education at the board level and at the community level in order to move this work forward. So I will say that in Stamford, we really have started with our early adopters, and those are our schools that really are our principals that we know are 100% on board with this, because this is not easy work. So during the year of the pandemic, we were doing all virtual training for our district leadership team. So all of our administrators went through this training on school climate and restorative practices. And we really were starting to have those conversations at the administrative level. And then we really went through with those principals that were ready to jump in and get started, those early adopters again, and let them go ahead and start grappling with the work and working with their schools. So as results started to show at those buildings, other schools then now are adding in. So we did not necessarily take a whole district approach. We're doing a tiered process, again, starting with those that we knew that were on board and kind of tweaking things and adding schools along the way. So obviously the goal will be to have all schools go through a more intensive training and implementing practices by the time that we, see this to fruition. I will say that professional development is key. I would even recommend taking an entire year to work with staff to help them understand what we've talked about, those trauma-informed practices, any cultural relevant bias practices that you would need to, and help them really understand and grapple with as adults before we're actually implementing in the building. The other challenge I would say to keep in mind is just this community education piece. I've heard it through some of the other districts that have shared, but also what is the level of education and information that you're providing to parents along the way, as well as your overall community, because there are a lot of myths out there about what restorative practices is and what they are not. And you and we as a district and we as educators who live this every day, we have to be the ones to craft the story and not the people who really truly don't understand the value of what we are trying to do for our students. And with that being said, I think there's just a struggle for people to understand that our obligation as educators is not just on academic content. We have an obligation to help children who come into our building who don't understand how to behave or don't understand what consequences are, because that's another misnomer out there that there are no consequences when there are restorative practices. No, we're actually teaching kids what happens when harm is done and what are the things that you should do in order to repair that. And one of the things that I've really struggled with as an associate superintendent is when we have staff that get in trouble or make mistakes or have a bad behavior, they come to the HR office for their meeting and they want us to be restorative. I had a bad day. I'm dealing with death in my family. My husband has cancer. And we're supposed to, you know, have a heart for people, right? And say, well, what can we do to help you not make this mistake again? We want you to continue to be a teacher. We want you to support you. But for some reason, when kids walk through the door and they make a mistake or they don't know how to engage in a social environment, we're supposed to suspend them and put them out of school and not teach them the right things to do. So I'm often bringing this to the attention of some of the adults that are giving pushback, because it's like restorative is a way of life, and we cannot be restorative for adults and then say that we're not going to be restorative for children, because ultimately if we don't teach them and we don't help them of how to repair harm, then they're going to graduate, maybe drop out, maybe, but they're going to be in the communities that we live in. And I certainly want people in the community that know how to be restorative and can repair harm and understand their part in a situation. And last but not least, I will say that we have implemented restorative student support facilitators. It has taken 3 years for us to get people on board. I've, back and forth with Joanne about coming up with a job description. And basically we realized we had no place for students you could say an in-school suspension, but it's a little bit more than that. So we're only allowed, the system is only set up to put kids out of school. So with the restorative student support facilitator, they're there to help with running circles and also helping with having those follow-up conversations with staff and parents and actually having a dedicated person there. So in Stanford, our in-school suspensions have gone up this year, but we actually have a system that's actually going to help kids understand what they've done. And we have adults to help them walk through those situations. So I am going to ask Peter Hadley. He's on the call. He's one of our restorative student support facilitators, which we have in our middle and high schools. I'm just going to let him share just a little perspective if he would like to. Peter.
Yes, thank you very much. So I thought I'd just start with a little kind of my personal journey. So last academic year, we were getting some PDs from Joanne on restorative practices, and we did one, and then we did the next one, and Joanne started saying, well, okay, what's opened up for you about restorative practices since our last session? And I didn't say it, but I thought, well, nothing, because it just kind of went out of existence. So then in the summer, there was the opportunity to do more in-depth PD, which I did out of personal interest. I had a nephew that had major issues in high school, ended up going to juvenile detention. And my sister always said, why didn't they deal with it in a more restorative way? The impact it had on his life being part of the school to prison pipeline totally did not work. So I had a very kind of personal interest in finding out more about it. And then over the summer, there was they advertised all these restorative student support facilitated positions, and I thought, yes, this district is getting serious about this. Because the thing is, if you just do a PD once every month or something like that, it's really hard to get it implemented and into place. So now it's my position full time to get restorative practices implemented into Clunan Middle School in Stanford. And the job is evolving, and in terms of reactive to proactive, it's definitely, we're still in a reactive stage. I'm spending a lot of time putting out fires and so on. But when I first started, I was really working at the request of admin primarily. It was like, oh, Peter, can you deal with this? Can you deal with that? And boom. And so I would. But now I'm getting requests from teachers. Peter, can you come in and help us? You know, I've got this class that's out of control. We need a circle. So we'll go in, we'll look at, creating a working agreement with the kids. I have kids initiating circles by saying, you know, there's trouble brewing. There was a kid who came to me one day. I get to know all the discipline issues because whenever there's a re-entry from a suspension, I'm brought in for that. So, you know, we meet with parents, kids as they come back in, creating agreements going forward, make sure that there's not a repeat of the behavior that got them suspended in the first place. But as a result of that, I'm developing great relationships with kids because, you know, my opening line with many kids when I go to see them is, don't worry, you're not in trouble. I just need to talk to you. And so I explain, you know, I'm not here to get people in trouble. I'm here to make sure the relationships work in the school. And that's between students and students, students and teachers, and even sometimes teachers and teachers. But it's evolving in the way that, you know, the word is out, and I'm not just getting the requests from admin anymore. I'm getting requests from students. I'm getting requests from teachers. And we've done facilitations with, you know, students, their parents, admin, teachers, all different kinds of combinations of those. It's such an issue because sometimes, you know, we've had parents wanting to fight each other in circles. So there really is a need for this, you know, a restoration of relationships and a repairing of harm at all sorts of levels because we're part of a community. So it's a growing, evolving position that I have, but it's, you know, every day is different. Every day I feel like I'm having conversations that make a difference, conversations that are important. And I'm really seeing my role as a facilitator, a relationship coach, an SEL coach. But things go best when I just sit back and listen and give often, you know, the students a chance to, when we get to that question, you know, what needs to happen to make things as right as possible. Kids will come up with the greatest ideas. And when they come up with the ideas, there's buy-in from them. And there's also a sense of ownership and that they belong to the community because they're now being a positive part of it. So I think it's very, very important that we move away from a punishment model to discipline, that we see any misbehavior as behavior calling for attention. And misbehavior, it has to be seen as a learning opportunity. And without kids learning from those experiences, we're not really going to make the difference that we're here to make. So
thank you, Peter, so much.
Thank you
for sharing that. Okay, let's move on to Stratford. Amy, are you going to take it? Finish.
Hi, you can also like just raise your hand because I'm trying to do the whole, 3 minutes only. I'm so excited. I was going to put my name in the chat. I just don't want to be distracted. So we've been doing this for a little while, but I did want to talk a little bit more about how the rubber hits the road, right? Like when it's happening in schools. So the teachers are working hard at making relationships. The admin is trying to make relationships, and we're doing that. And then when something goes awry, we have these great meetings, and I focus on the meetings because that's what I do a lot. As a matter of fact, a student was doing something today. I was arranging that just before. He's helping the custodian get the piece of clothing that he tossed into the stairwell, and it landed on a place where you cannot access it. So he was helping him out. I called this parent, let him know what was going on. And he went to go do his apology and make amends with those students and with the custodian to make it right with them. I think there's so many different things to talk about because the old school was like, you reprimand, and then the parents would always give the advice, stay away from that kid. And then they have 5 or 6 kids at the end of a year or 2 or 3 or 6. Kids can be here for 7 years. We're pre-K to 6. And then there's 10 kids they can't be near. There's only 3 classrooms that, I can't keep you away from everyone. So we would make amends to it. We think about that like with your own children. And I love this line that Joanne would talk about is like, in your family, you don't kick a kid out of the family. What do you say, Aunt Matilda's for a week, because we just suspend you from our family. We can't do that. We don't really have out of school suspension anymore. We have the occasional in-school or half-day in-school suspension. And they have to work on some things while they're here so they don't get kicked out. In fact, parents like, I'm coming to get my kid. I'm like, no, we want him to stay. We're letting you know what's going on. The other piece is the parents. We used to be told to keep parents of two students who have had an issue together. You know, they're fighting frequently, even if it's a physical fight or just verbal altercations. Keep them, don't let the parents, because we had parents who would fight together, you know, if they cross paths. So now I've had a couple of just ones that stick in my mind where kids have said really horrible things. One said, this is your, she was pretending to fly a plane. This is you on a plane going back to your country, and crashed the plane. And, you know, and so that was horrible. And when they got together, she was like, we're from Poland. Like, you can't say that. Like, the other parent got to hear that that's not a value they were teaching their child. They were able to talk to their child in front of the other family, racist remarks, you know, using the N-word. And I was a little nervous, you know, like I had my faith and, you know, I made sure I did my background work, but another child used the N-word, and I know the receiving child's parent was very displeased. And I thought, oh, and she did great. She was like, took on a parental role. Like, she stepped in and said, look, you know, we don't talk like this. You don't know how hurtful it is. She was so kind to that other child. And that receiving mom was also able to say, like, that's not a value we teach in our house. And I think that's huge when we bring the community in. I can't say enough about it. I've loved it since it started. Doing the staff to staff work has been fabulous as well. You know, if staff are not doing so well in a classroom, you know, that classroom teacher has been able to talk with that staff member. I wrote all these notes as you all were talking, and I'll put my name and an email address. I know we've been doing it for several years. The two things that I think of that if somebody out there wants to help support us do that is always funding for constant training, because new teachers come all the time. And you all were talking about things that I've forgotten to do and I would love to do with students being trained to facilitate. We could do that with our sixth graders. Funding is one, but I know at the high school level, they struggle more with what time are they going to do the meeting? Like, I can pull a student if it's, you know, something at a certain time and say we can get together, but it's tough for a teacher who's teaching 6 classes. You know, when are they going to be able to get together with that student? And that maybe the administrator who's going to facilitate that. So they need a way to do that. So those are the two things that like was feedback. Like, I know you wanted some things, Joanne, about, you know, how can you work it through too, you know? Anyway, if you have any other questions, I hope that was enough and not too much, but we're excited about it here.
Thank you. Now, I know that Jason, maybe you can just put your name in the chat, and Ebony, I want to make sure we get to everybody, and our line is long. So can you guys hang for a while? I mean, you're in there with Amy, you're at Johnson House in Stratford, and they're being trained here as well. Are you good with that?
Sure.
Jason and Ebony, or?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to Cass or Rosie, who has some really interesting background and experience. Rosie?
Okay, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Joanne and Pat, for inviting me to this great conversation. I'm enjoying listening to all of you. And my name is Rosie O'Brien Wojtek. As Joanne just mentioned, I served as a principal at Ivy Drive Elementary School in Bristol for 20 years and retired in June 2019. I was retired for a month and then became the Assistant Executive Director for the Connecticut Association of Schools, and I've worked at CAS for the past 3 years. Having a welcome, safe, and positive school climate and respective school culture built upon diversity, equity, and inclusion is critical to the academic, social, emotional, physical, and cognitive success and well-being of the whole child, every child. While I was at the University of Oregon working on my PhD, I worked as the assistant to the elementary field experience coordinator, supervising student teachers and their supervisors. And during my 4 years at the U of O, working in this capacity, I was in a lot of schools. What I realized from this experience is that not only is the school climate and culture visible, you can see it, you can hear it, and most importantly, you can feel it. You can see it and feel it and hear it through the learning, through the moment that you step into the school and the classrooms, through the artifacts on the wall, what people say and what they don't say, and how people treat visitors and each other. Climate and school culture matters, connectedness and relationships matter. When I became the principal of Ivy Drive School, I knew the first thing I needed to do was to establish and maintain a welcoming, safe, and positive school climate, culture, and learning environment. Working together with the faculty and staff, we spent a lot of time building relationships through team building and community building activities. Our staff was trained and implemented PBIS school-wide with fidelity, but after a few years, we realized that students were working for the extrinsic instead of the intrinsic rewards. They kept wanting more and more and more, and PBIS wasn't working like it did at the beginning. As a school, we began working on building positive school climate, and we're one of the first schools to be trained school-wide to use the restorative practices framework and philosophy. There are so many things about our use of restorative practices that I could share, but I would like to briefly highlight two of the restorative practice strategies that we use that were really important to the overall success and implementation at Ivy Drive. First of all, being proactive and focusing on school and classroom climate, we implemented circles to build relationships, trust, and a sense of belonging. Teachers began each day with circles, first just to help students get to know each other through questions like, what's your favorite ice cream? What's your favorite sport? What's your favorite movie? And then next, the teachers began to ask more thought-provoking questions around current topics of interest with students. This began to be one of the most popular classroom activities, and students made sure that circles happened every single day. Over time, teachers began using academic circles with curriculum-based discussions such as how students solve their math problems, discussions about the characters or plot of a shared book that they were reading, or sharing their writer's workshop poems. And finally, teachers began using circles to discuss and restore classroom and playground conflicts and issues that involve several students and or the entire class. But an important lesson that we learned was that these conversations couldn't happen until the student relationships and the trust had been built and established. The faculty also decided to use the circle structure for our faculty meetings, and we added circles to our PTA agenda to model for parents what we were doing in our classrooms with circles and to build relationships among parents. This actually increased the number of PTA members attending our meetings, encouraged them to get more involved at the school, and establish friendships among the parents. Secondly, and just as important as building relationships, was creating the expectations and shared agreements for the school, what was previously known as the school rules. Instead of the adults creating the school rules, we gave students a voice and made them a part of the decision-making process. This created a sense of pride and ownership among students and generated an enthusiasm for holding themselves and each other accountable for abiding by the shared expectations and agreements, and over time established our school norms. The process began with students and teachers creating their classroom expectations and agreeing to follow them and live them. The shared agreements over time became the norms of the classroom. It often included a class pledge and a signing and posting of the classroom contract in a visible place. We also created a set of school-wide expectations and made them our shared agreements. Each classroom brainstormed a list of expectations. Our fifth grade students worked in groups to collate the ideas and create a set of expectations for our school. The fifth grade students presented all the grade level created expectations to students at an assembly, and all K-5 students voted to accept them following our assembly. The expectations became our shared agreements and were put on posters and posted for students to see. Students took a pledge and signed a large bulletin board in our front hall, agreeing to follow and hold themselves and each other accountable for our shared group agreements. We continued to review the agreements throughout the year in classrooms and school-wide assemblies, teaching and reteaching the social skills as needed. Recently, through my role at CAS, I work with many principals and assistant principals across the state. They will tell you that even before the pandemic, but especially now that we're back in school, building a safe, positive, welcoming, and inclusive climate and culture is critically important. At all levels, they're helping students build relationships through team building and community building activities, along with teaching and reteaching social skills and skills of collaboration to their students. Administrators and teachers are also spending a great deal of time helping students and families deal with mental health issues and trauma, and principals are dealing with how to make sure their school community is addressing the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of this has to be in place if we're going to help students recover from being isolated and disconnected from school during the pandemic, so that teachers can help students regain their learning losses and accelerate student learning and achievement. Finally, the past 2 weeks, I've been working with our CAS Honors and Awards Committee to determine the 2021-22 elementary and middle level exemplary school of the year. One of the criteria, probably the most important for an exemplary school, is a welcoming, safe, inclusive, and positive school climate and culture. As I said at the beginning, when you walk in a school, not only is the climate, culture, and learning environment visible, but you can see it, you can hear it, and most of all, you can feel it. Over and over again in our exemplary school finalists and recipients of the awards are the themes of we are a family, together we can, there isn't anything one of us wouldn't do for the other, and all means all. These messages resonate across and throughout our outstanding Connecticut schools. This restorative work is critical to the success of our schools. It takes a lot of proactive work, as you've said. It isn't easy, but building a positive, safe climate and giving everyone the tools to repair the harm when it happens is the foundation, and it's essential for ensuring high-performing exemplary schools. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. Let's go right to Eric Brown. There's a lot of work going on in Waterbury, but I think Eric's school adopted it early and had amazing results. So Eric, to you.
Well, good morning to everybody. I have in my office, I have two of my counselors from my counseling department that are with me, so they might chime in. I know what I'm going to try to do is be brief. Be brief, brother, is something I have learned a long time ago, so I'll try to be brief so we can get right on with this. One, I want to say that I am totally in support of the restorative practice because I have a completely restorative practice school. And to move from PBIS to restorative practice was a complete cultural shift, not only with students, but also with parents. We went from a perspective where we had the color charts in all of our classrooms, where the kids, if they acted well, they would move up the chart. If they acted poorly, they would go down the chart, and it would be the click chart, the color chart. To get teachers from that was difficult because that was a control. So the students would go home and they would tell their parents, you know, the parents would say, well, what color were you on today? And they would tell their parents, I was on green, or I was on yellow, and they'd get a reward. Or I was on red, and then we had kids getting beat up all over the place. So we needed to remove the color charts, and that required a complete cultural shift for that to happen, not just for teachers, but for students as well as for parents. I know I spoke to one of my counselors who's sitting here, and she said she had a student this morning reach out to her reach out to her to ask for a mediation with another student that he was having difficulty with. Now, I am a kindergarten to 5th grade school, and this was a 1st grade child that requested that mediation. So that is a complete cultural shift for that to happen. And just know that this is a 1st grader and know the pandemic. So for a 1st grader to be able to take that kind of ownership tells you that the whole building has embraced the restorative model. I wrote a couple of other notes down here. I will say this, that it is about building relationships, and that to me is the key for restorative practice. I know we've had a couple of students. One of the relationships we've built with is with the Department of Children and Families. We've had a couple of children, and I'll give you these 2 cases, and then I'll get out of your way as fast as possible, because I know you're looking for specific examples. One of the examples we have a student who house got raided just recently, and he was taken away from his mother in the hospital when they got there. The Department of Children and Families found a way to transport that child to this school from his foster home to here, just to keep the relationship that he has with the school. At least he'll have that relationship. Well, that was good. It was good because when he came back here with his new clothes and the steady household, they forgot his glasses. He didn't have his glasses. And so he can't see a thing, and nobody knew he couldn't see. But because he came back with us and we have a relationship with him, it wasn't his teacher that noticed, it was my parent liaison that noticed, because the whole school knows this and says he doesn't have his glasses. How's he going to be able to see anything? Because we build relationships, we recognized that he didn't have his glasses. He had everything else you wouldn't have known, but only people that have relationships can identify something as important, but as minute as glasses. We have another situation where we have a first grader. Department of Children and Family kept him with us. His mother was stabbed to death by his father. And so he's now in foster care, and he came. And he's still with us. You know, he is seeking his lunchbox. And he wouldn't talk to anybody. And he came to us and says, I want my lunchbox, the lunchbox I had on the day that his mother brought him to school, and then he never saw her again. So those little things are so important for children. And these are all first graders I mentioned to you. These are important to children because we are in the child development business. And part of that is being able to build relationships and show children how to speak to one another and work with one another. And we definitely have that going on here. I love the stories of Stratford. I love the ambassadors that I heard. But children can be their own ambassadors, and they can seek out support from counselors and from administrators and say when request on their own that they would like to have somebody come in and mediate a situation. So between that, the parents, the community, and our children, I have to say that we have found tremendous success with restorative practice here in Waterbury at Kingsbury Elementary School.
Thank you, Eric. If you put your email in the chat, people might want to come and visit you, as I have. It's amazing. And many other places as well, but that was one of the first walkthroughs. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Annalise Spaziano, my good colleague from East Lyme.
Hi, everybody. I am completely inspired, re-inspired to hear all of your stories today. It's been a rough couple of years, as we know, and to hear all of the efforts that districts across the state continue to make to keep restorative practice alive and well is to me just, it helps me move along. So my journey started many, many years ago as a classroom teacher in an alternative program. So I have been practicing restorative practice before I knew it was restorative practice. And then I had stumbled upon the IIRP training as a building. I became building principal at that alternative program. And I stumbled upon the training, which I took it upon myself to go to the training and created some in-school practices affiliated with, restorative work. I circled up 90 students every day in the gym as part of my core practice as a building administrator and the teachers. And started to dabble in that continuum of practices. What I love about restorative practice is that it is truly theory and research based and practical. So the strategies are practical and can you use them in the moment. And it has changed my professional practice. It also has changed my practice at home as a mom. So my journey from the building principal level, I then moved on to instructional supervisor of student development, which was an instructional supervisor position in Milford. I see some of my former Milford colleagues on the call, who I'm sure have been a part of this work and can speak to it as well. But as part of that role, I was able to leverage restorative practice now at a district level. And this was in Milford, where I formerly was before East Lyme. And in that position, I pulled all administrators, support staff, school climate specialists together to do an initial restorative practice training over the summertime. And Joanne was that trainer for us. And what was also awesome about that training is we opened it to other districts. So our staff had the opportunity to kind of be among other folks across the state, to hear some of the other challenges that folks were having, to know that it wasn't something that was happening just in Milford, or that challenges could look different depending on the district. You know, it was really, really nice for us to step outside of our Milford world and collaborate with colleagues while we became trained in restorative practice. From there, we actually developed RP training teams, and the school climate specialists were the lead of those teams. So then we turnkeyed the restorative practice training into 14 buildings through a series of learning modules that were offered up by our internal staff. So we treated the restorative practice training as sort of a train the trainer, and we turnkeyed it into our buildings and brought some of those core practices that we felt teachers needed to know in order to implement those really, really practical strategies in the classroom, and to get, just as what many of you have said, really to shift the mindset around what is restorative practice and what does it mean for teachers in the classroom in their daily practice. And so from there, we then looked at our advisory model and thought, how could we be more proactive in the use of circles across the district? So we did shift to an advisory model at the middle school and high school, where students formed in circles as part of the curriculum. And at the elementary level, we brought back morning meeting. So morning meeting had gone away with the shift to the Common Core state standards, and we were at a space and place where we knew that we needed to bring morning meeting back, and so that was the circle format at the elementary level. And then we got to the next part of the journey was the development and implementation of SEL curriculum. And we started at the elementary level for that. And what we did was we actually embedded some of the core tools from restorative practice into our curriculum as anchor tools. So many of you have discussed Ruler as a curriculum that you are implementing in your districts. We know Ruler has anchor tools such as the mood meter and meta moment. Well, we developed, or we refer to some of these restorative practices as anchor tools in our SEL curriculum. So, for example, when we're working through conflict management or conflict resolution in the classroom, we refer to the restorative questions as an anchor tool for teachers to utilize in the classroom. We refer to the social discipline window as a anchor tool to think about how could you engage students in collectively problem solving around an issue that might be happening in the classroom. So we started to take these components of restorative practice and embed them into our curriculum as resources, so that it didn't feel as though it was separate and apart from the work, but it was integrated into the work. Some of my reflection from that work that has happened in Milford. Restorative practice takes hard work. I am so excited to hear about the districts that are hiring staff clearly connected to the work associated with restorative practice. I can't wait to reach out and learn more about that, because to do it well and to do it right, you need the space and time and the folks with the right mindset to implement. It takes a certain amount of resilience on the part of the adults who are working and the students and the staff. And like I had said before, it's a mindset shift. What I love most about restorative practice is that it humanizes decisions that we make in life. So I'll end with a story and then just share where we are in our journey here in Eastline. When I was the principal at the academy in Milford, I also oversaw the afternoon program, which was where all of our expelled students came for 2.5 hours, 4 days a week. And that program would be upwards of 25 students by the end of the year. So it's 25 students who have been ostracized from the community as a result of being expelled due to the decisions that they've made. And this, we're going back, almost 20 years ago, right? Well, 15 maybe. And restorative practice just wasn't on the table as an alternative to expulsion. And so I really, truly saw students' lives impacted long-term as a result of those expulsions happening. And I just felt so helpless that I couldn't do anything to help shift the way we think about that. Fast forward to one of my last involvement in terms of restorative practice in Milford. We had a group of students at the high school who took a picture of a student who was suffering from a very rare disease that left her wheelchair bound and nonverbal. And that picture had a pretty horrific, comment associated with it, and it sort of spread like wildfire through the building, at which point a student who came across it was like, holy cow, someone needs to know about this and let an administrator know. So historically, we would have gathered up all the folks who spread that, took the picture, altered it, spread it throughout the community, and they would have either been suspended or up for expulsion. Turns out that many of those students who were involved in that act were a part of a sports team. And it turns out that the mother of the student really, really wanted to meet with the folks who were behind that work. So we had someone come in, actually from the ADA, and help facilitate a restorative circle. So the wheelbound chair student with her mother was in a circle with the members of that athletic team who were involved in the act and their mothers. And I can tell you that by the end of the circle, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, because what happened was a simple act without thinking about the impact it has on a family or an individual. It now became really, it became real very quickly for all of those members. And so in lieu of moving towards a traditional behavior consequence like a suspension or expulsion, the team decided to host a fundraiser in honor of the disease in which she suffered from. And the student went to the game. She was honored at the game and recognized at the game. And in the end, you know, I really feel like when you think about what's the power behind restorative practice, for me, it lies in the stories that come with it. So in East Lyme, we are at the beginning of our journey. So we, Joanne and Pat are coming in June. We have building-based teams ready and set to go for that training. And we probably will follow a very similar model here that I had followed in Milford, and that those groups will determine, you know, how do we want to bring this learning back to the buildings and continue our journey. So, but it does start with just getting folks on the same page, working towards that mindset shift, and you know, developing them professionally before making any sort of real shifts in practices. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Annalise, so much. And we're going to move to Jolene in Glastonbury. But let me just say that our Greenwich High School Dean of Students had the audacity to have his wife have a baby last night. So he's not here, but I will put his contact information. He's the Dean of Students at Greenwich High School. And Marco Torillo, who is an assistant principal at John Wallace Middle School in Newington, had to jump off for an emergency. So we've got, I think, 5 left. So maybe, and I hate to say it, but if we can all be very brief in our comments and just do what we can so everybody can have a chance to share, and maybe we'll have a part 2 of this if the collaborative is interested, because there is so much good work going on. So Jolene, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Hi, good morning. Jolene Piscatello. I'm the Director of Special Education with Glastonbury Public Schools. However, the chunk of my restorative work and my early learning with restorative and school climate was done in Stafford Public Schools. I worked there for 15 years. First started as school social worker, building elementary principal and director of pupil services. And that's as the principal of an elementary school is when we first implemented. And I agree, I think the work with restorative comes from stories. So actually that's what I plan to only share a brief story with you. And that is how we implemented restorative training with our elementary school staff and teachers. And there was some pushback with that. So we decided to target a certain area, and that was recess. Teachers had a lot of concern about recess behavior, transition in from recess, and was interfering with their instructional time because they were spending so much time kind of helping the students work out the recess challenges that, you know, many of us who've worked with elementary age students have experienced. So the way we supported our teachers in the beginning was the assistant principal and I would go in and we would model restorative circles. And as we help build the capacity of our teachers to grow that work of restorative circles and see the benefit of even just designating that 5 to 10 minutes, having the students learn to talk it out, what they started to see was the students were able to have those restorative conversations actually in recess and during a conflict versus having to write office referrals, sending kids out. And we did see a decrease of office referrals, strictly again, focusing on that recess behavior. And therefore kids were spending more time in the classroom. They improved their communication skills. They were respecting one another and being more inclusive during the recess time. And I certainly, it was some of the highlights of the work that I did as a school principal to go in and model those restorative circles and see the benefit for the students and the teachers. So I'm going to be very brief because I'm curious and interested, as you all are. I want to make sure all of the participants here today, but highly committed to this work, so much so that when I started in Glastonbury in August, I did quickly contact Joanne and discuss her ability and availability, really, because I know her and Pat are highly sought after to come in and do a little bit of work with our links, one of our specialized school programs. So we're starting the work here. They had always been, the staff there had been dabbling in restorative, but really looking forward to having more specific training and supporting our students here in Glastonbury as I've seen the work in other places. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jolene. I don't see Taylor Rye. Taylor, are you there? He is the principal of Granby Middle School. They're just piloting the work there. Am I wrong? Do I not see Taylor? Okay, we can go to Plainfield. And Marco Turillo already put his contact information from Newington in the chat. So Colin, are you around?
I'm here.
Okay, great.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I will keep my remarks brief as well, but I think we're talking a lot about mindset shifts, which I appreciate, because I think oftentimes as adults we talk about a culture shift, and really it's not a culture shift at all, because culturally, to Olympia's point earlier, as adults, when we have problems, we want that restorative approach. But then with our students, oftentimes the age-old practices punish, detention, suspensions, and so on. So with our staff here at PCMS, what we've tried to drive home is the whole idea that if all you have is a hammer in your toolbox, then students often look like nails. So if we look at students from a perspective of how can we restore the situation and teach them the strategies to repair the damage that they caused, ultimately we're helping young minds in the long run. So from our standpoint here at PCMS, we've been very fortunate to work with Joanne and Pat over the last few years. First, kind of training our staff here in the building. In our district right now, we're kind of a one building pilot, trying to branch out to other buildings over the years. And now we're in the process now of kind of training our staff, with both Joanne as well as, trainers that are training our staff themselves. And we implement restorative circles. We implement a restorative room. We've gotten rid of our ISS room, and we actually have renamed it, with the Braille, placket and everything as our restorative room. And we try to change that verbiage in our building so that ISS doesn't become this punitive discussion. And we use that room for a combination of short stints to 30 minutes, half day, full day, depending on the nature of the situation. And we do circles in that room. We have our counselors and staff work with students that are in those rooms for various periods of time. And we use programs. There's a program we use called Suite 360, which is a program that kind of encompasses some restorative approaches with our kiddos, along with narrative 4 and things of that nature. Then of course, think sheets and repair letters are all part of our verbiage here in school. And certainly we're not done. We have a long way to go. 3 years in seems like a long time, but it definitely is a process to kind of change that mindset amongst staff and students. In this district as well, we're also in our first year of a 1-year pilot with a ruler program. We hope to branch out to the rest of our district in the coming years, but can't say enough about what this means to us educationally. Coming from a different district in the past where I was trained in ruler earlier, and now bringing that philosophy along with restorative to Plainfield is a step in the right direction. And we've seen nothing but success in terms of a drop off in behaviors, a drop off in severe issues, in our building. I think a lot of that deals with the staff and student approach to restorative. So thanks for the time, guys. I won't take too much more of your time. I appreciate the invite. Thanks, Joanne.
Thanks, Colin. Put your information in the chat so people can contact you. Orange, Mary, thank you for your patience.
Hi, everyone. I want to start by thanking our state representatives who are on the call today, because we all know how important the work at the state level is to supporting our students and our staff around social, emotional health and mental health in general, especially during these really challenging times. So thank you for listening to all of us. I'll be very brief. We had so many great things to be said about the work that's being done across the state. So I certainly couldn't overshine any of that. But just to tell you a little bit about our journey, we started with Ruler about 5 years ago, thanks to Mark Brackett and his Yale team, to give us a foundation for infusing emotional intelligence into our work. And through that work, we began to embed the SEL standards into our curriculum. We talked to Joanne and Pat and realized that Ruler is part of it, but certainly not the whole. So she came and did a wonderful PD with our staff around ACEs that we loved so much that we had offered it over the summer. And for anybody who didn't go over this, attend during the summer, we offered it during the school year. And so all of our certified staff and most of our non-certified staff has had the ACEs workshop through Pat and Joanne. We then moved to a full day of school climate to really solidify that foundation of the importance of adult behavior on our students' success, whether it's emotional, academic, or otherwise. And now we are in the process of moving towards training for restorative practices. So we'll be holding restorative practice training over 2 full day, 4 days of 2 full day trainings with Joanne and Pat, where we are inviting all of our school staff to attend, our local police department, and hopefully we'll even have room to invite some of our parents to participate in that. As I heard somebody mention earlier, how important it is to make sure our families know what we're doing and understand not the myth of what restorative is, but what it actually is. So I think that that's a little tidbit I came from today is, yeah, why not invite some of our parents to this? So that's our work, and that's where we are in our journey right now.
Thank you, Mary. And last but not least, wonderful colleagues from Region 14.
Yes, thank you, Joanne. My name is Pam Sorty. I'm the principal at Nottawag High School in Region 14. Julianne Morin, our SEL coordinator, and I believe Declan Curtin, our Dean of Students, is here. In 2 minutes, been in education for 34 years. I've been teacher, a counselor, administrator. I've worked at the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school. And I will tell you, restorative practices is effective. It is one of the most effective practices I've ever been involved in. I think somebody else said, I did it before it was a thing. And I think that's the way that I worked. Some of the things you heard today, I want to highlight. Focus on relationships. I've been administrator at the middle school and at the high school. At the middle school, relationships is the foundation. Once you have that, you've got to have administrator buy-in. It has to happen. Administrators have to be modeling this so that the teachers believe it. It is not a program. It is a mindset. There is no script for this because every single restorative practice is going to look different because every situation is different. Every student is different. So you kind of have to understand how that's all going to come together. And really what this is it's the reality of using SEL skills. Teach SEL, but now you got to practice it. And that's what this is, both the proactive part of restorative and the reactive part of restorative. It's using SEL. I have lots to say, but I only got another minute. It's about conversations. It's about empathy, honesty, caring. It's hard work and uncomfortable at times. Both can be uncomfortable leading it. The kids can be uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, it feels good. And it's what healthy adults do. So we are training kids for the reality of being healthy adults where we don't all get along all the time. And sometimes we make bad decisions. So what do we do about that? Reactive side. And on the proactive side, just like we have with our families, we want to strengthen those relationships and understand and empathize how other people are feeling. And if we can teach that in schools, we're preparing kids for success in life. And that's what we're all about. Lots of stories. My dean comes in every day with a way to make me smile about two kids that shook hands, hugged it out, as we said, because of the work that we're doing. So I'd be more than happy if anybody's unsure or want to hear more stories. I got lots to tell. Thank you.
And just to punctuate that Pam is at a high school. And so high school is one of the hardest nuts to crack. So those of you who are thinking about that, I know technically we only have 2 minutes left. We're fine to hang for a little bit. Really want to give the collaborative members a chance to jump in and ask questions or make comments. Thank you for your patience. Anybody? Any of our legislative colleagues? I'm you know me, I call people out.
Well, and I think while people prepare their questions, because I'm sure that there are either questions that are in the chat or reflections in the chat, I want to thank all of the districts that have spoken today. I mean, one thing that is a line that is really carried throughout these presentations is the enthusiasm with which restorative practices are being implemented because they work. And they draw upon the various areas of knowledge, the various tools that we have available in the state under the umbrella of, this isn't a what we do, it's a how we do and why we do, which is really exciting. So I'd like to recognize Representative Kathy Kennedy. Hi, Representative.
Hi, Steve, how are you? Thank you for recognizing me. I just want to give a huge, huge thank you to you, to Joanne, and to each and every one of you for taking the time this morning to go through this very long. It may have been 2 hours. I actually could listen for another 2 hours because it has been that informative and I've learned so much from all of you. I was trying to type it into the chat, but didn't think I had enough time. So thank you. I really, truly thank you for all you've done. And I look forward to more conversation. And I think it was Mary Ito or someone that said they have something coming up. I would love to listen in or be a part of that. So thank you to every one of you. I truly appreciate it. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Representative. One thing that resonated for me so clearly is that there is no one size fits all. And I love the way leadership within a particular district, together with practitioners and teachers, all come together to figure out what your fit is. And to engage parents in the way that you are in the various districts is also really, really exciting. And this isn't easy work, right? It is about culture change. And oftentimes that's the biggest barrier that we find is the need to change hearts and minds around the work of the skill set. So I want to appreciate you. Are there any other questions from any of our members? Feel free to use your hand raise.
Steve?
Yes, go ahead, Representative McCarty. Welcome.
No, thank you very much. And I apologize that I'm not on Zoom, but I just wanted the attendees to know that I listened, and it's really given me inspiration today and even more hope. I know that we're going to get this right throughout our districts, and I just want to thank the collaborative for bringing in the experts and sharing their stories with us. It's so important, and I look forward to continuing the work with all of you, and thank you for the presentations. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you so much, Representative. Representative Comey.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you so much for to everybody who presented. It's always, a great learning experience for us. And, for me, it brings up so much possibility, and it also brings up a lot of questions, right? So questions for my district, for neighboring districts. And I certainly want to see all schools, even the high schools where I had heard, and I heard loud and clear that it's a little bit more difficult to get these practices being used more on a regular basis. But that also that we have, anything that we can do as legislators to make sure that there is, equity and across all of the districts and all of the schools within the district. That seems it's sort of piecemeal, maybe, but I'll be asking a lot more questions to figure out what's going on in the different schools and in the different environments, learning environments. So thank you all for all your hard work. Very inspiring.
Thank you so much, Representative. And as you know, Joanne Freiberg and Pat Ciccone have offered themselves as a resource here. I know that the State Department of Ed is also a resource for how it is that we wrap our thinking about delivering the opportunity for different districts so that we can meet them where they are. You know, it's also remarkable that as districts are watching now, young people may be watching, parents may be watching, thinking, you know, I remember a situation that could have been more restorative. I remember a situation where I wish I was engaged and involved. And that's what's really exciting, is that we're seeing ourselves in this work and that we're asking for it. Amanda.
Steve, I just wanted to piggyback on some of the thoughts here, and I'm glad you weaved in education in the Department of Ed work. A lot of what I heard, and I think would be more than happy to support and have conversations with districts on, is the systemic approach to all of this. How are we aligning and integrating this work? We heard about that through some folks sharing about SEL work, or discipline work, and how these things are moving together. And then also thinking about the contextual implementation. So how are we centering the needs of our community, of our students, of our families, and of our staff with this work, and understanding those needs and selecting the practices that work best for them. So thank you again, and I'm more than happy to reach out and support districts in their school climate and culture efforts, and how RP fits with all of this.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much. So without anything further, I know that we've gone a little bit over time, but I think it was important for us to, as a state and as members of the collaborative, to see how our districts are doing the hard work. This is the reason that we want to have your back around restorative practices and social and emotional skills building. Your testimony today, I think, will inform our approaches on how we can continue to support you. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and just have a wonderful day.